The flashing red and blue lights cut through the quiet of the affluent street, casting long, menacing shadows across manicured lawns. Officer Derek Harlan believed he had caught a common thief lurking near the prestigious Oakage Estates. He snapped the cuffs onto the older black man in the faded sweatshirt, completely ignoring the calm, steady voice demanding a supervisor. Harlan smirked, utterly certain of his authority. He had no idea the wrists he had just bound belonged to a decorated two-star general, and that the United States military was already racing toward them. The early morning air carried the faint scent of pine and freshly cut grass. It was a neighborhood of sprawling properties, manicured hedges, and silent security cameras. Major General Marcus Langford, a man who had commanded thousands of troops across multiple combat deployments, was enjoying a rare weekend of absolute quiet. Having recently been transferred to the nearby military installation to oversee a major strategic command reorganization, he had just settled into a stunning home on a quiet, tree-lined drive. He kept himself in immaculate physical condition. That morning, he wore well-worn, faded gray sweatpants, a plain black hooded sweatshirt, and scuffed running shoes. There were no stars on his collar, no ribbons on his chest. Only a man taking a brisk walk to clear his head before another demanding week of briefings. He paused near the edge of his property, crouching to stretch his calves against the stone retaining wall. In his left ear, a wireless earbud connected him to an ongoing muted conference call with his chief of staff, Colonel Julian Ashford, who was running through the morning's intelligence briefing. 2 blocks away, a local municipal police cruiser rolled slowly through the neighborhood. Behind the wheel sat Officer Derek Harlan. He was a veteran of the force with a reputation that preceded him, a record dotted with excessive force complaints and racial profiling allegations that the Union had always managed to quietly bury. In the passenger seat sat Officer Nolan Pierce, a rookie with little time on the street, still idealistic and eager to please his senior partner. Harlan tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the immaculate driveways. There had been a string of minor package thefts in a neighboring area, and he was already on edge, eager to make a caller, when his gaze landed on the figure in the faded black hoodie crouching by the stone wall. His posture stiffened. "Look at this guy," Harlan muttered, slowing the cruiser to a crawl. Pierce looked up from the dispatch terminal. "Looks like someone jogging, Derek." "Nobody jogs in a hoodie that beat up around here, kid. This is a gated-style community. Homes like these don't come cheap." Harlan's jaw set into a hard line. "He's casing the houses, checking the sight lines." "He's just stretching," Pierce said, his voice hesitant. "We don't have a description of the porch pirate." "I don't need a description," Harlan snapped, hitting the accelerator and swerving the heavy cruiser abruptly toward the curb. "I know it doesn't belong." The screech of tires shattering the morning silence made Marcus turn his head. He watched with mild curiosity as the police vehicle threw itself into park, blocking the sidewalk just inches from where he stood. The overhead lights weren't flashing yet, but the intent was unmistakable. Harlan stepped out of the vehicle, his hand instinctively resting on the butt of his service weapon. "Hey, you! Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus rose slowly to his full height. His military posture was undeniable. Shoulders squared, spine perfectly straight. He did not raise his hands in panic, nor did he shrink back. He simply met Harlan's gaze with the calm, analytical look of a man accustomed to assessing threats in active war zones. "Good morning, officer," Marcus said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried natural authority. "Is there a problem?" "I'm asking the questions here," Harlan barked, stepping into Marcus's personal space. The officer was shorter, but he tried to compensate by jutting out his chest. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" "I am stretching my legs," Marcus replied calmly. Through his earbud, he could hear Colonel Ashford pause the briefing. Marcus tapped the earbud once, a signal for Ashford to stay on the line and listen. "Stretching your legs," Harlan repeated, a sneer curling his lip. "Do you live around here?" "I do." "What's the address?" Marcus pointed a single finger at the large modern colonial home directly behind him. "Right there." Harlan laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Right, you live in that house, the one that just sold for a fortune." "I am not familiar with the previous owners," Marcus said evenly. "But yes, I recently purchased this property." His tone remained perfectly level, though his eyes narrowed slightly. He recognized the tone, he recognized the posture. He had dealt with men like Harlan his entire life, long before the stars had adorned his uniform. "Let's see some ID!" Harlan demanded. For standing on my own property, Marcus asked, his voice cooling by several degrees. Unless I am suspected of committing a crime, officer, I am under no legal obligation to provide identification simply because you demand it. You match the description of a suspect involved in multiple burglaries in this area. Harlan lied effortlessly, closing the distance. Now give me your ID or I'm going to detain you. Pierce had stepped out of the passenger side, lingering near the trunk of the cruiser. Derek, maybe we should just... Shut up, Pierce, Harlan snapped without looking back. He turned his attention back to Marcus. Last chance, buddy. ID, now. Officer, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a register of pure command. You are currently operating on false premises. I suggest you take a step back, run the plates of the vehicles in that driveway, and rethink your approach. The absolute lack of fear in the black man's voice infuriated Harlan. To him, the calmness was defiance. The articulate speech was disrespect. All right, that's it. Put your hands behind your back. Harlan lunged forward, grabbing Marcus's left wrist aggressively. Marcus's combat instincts flared. Every muscle in his body tightened, and for a fraction of a second, his weight shifted. He could have broken Harlan's grip, disarmed him, and had the officer on the ground in seconds. But his brilliant tactical mind ran the algorithm of the situation perfectly. He was a black man in a hoodie facing an angry, prejudiced cop with a gun. If he fought back, he would be shot. If he complied, he would win the war later. Marcus immediately relaxed his arm, allowing Harlan to twist it behind his back with unnecessary force. I am complying, Marcus said loudly and clearly, ensuring Colonel Ashford was catching every word on the open line. I am not resisting. You are making an unlawful arrest on my private property. Save it for the judge, Harlan grunted, slamming the heavy steel handcuffs onto Marcus's wrists. He shoved Marcus roughly against the side of the police cruiser, the cold metal biting into the general's cheek. Pierce flinched, taking a half step forward. Derek, take it easy. He's not fighting you. He was resisting, Harlan lied, patting Marcus down with rough, invasive movements. Spread your legs. Harlan kicked the inside of Marcus's ankles. Marcus remained silent, his jaw clenched tight. He focused on his breathing, drawing air in through his nose and out through his mouth, maintaining the legendary composure that had earned him the Silver Star in combat. Let him hang himself, Marcus thought. Let him dig the hole so deep he can never climb out. Harlan reached into the front pocket of Marcus's sweatpants and pulled out a slim black leather card holder. Let's see who you really are, the officer muttered triumphantly. He flipped the wallet open. Inside was Marcus's driver's license, a black American Express card, and his Department of Defense Common Access card. Harlan pulled out the driver's license, shining his flashlight on it despite the rising sun. Marcus Langford. Out-of-state address. I knew you didn't live here. I told you I just moved in, Marcus said steadily, his face still pressed against the cruiser. The address hasn't been updated yet. If you look behind the license, you will find my primary identification. Harlan snorted and pulled out the military ID. He glanced at it, but his bias had already drawn a permanent filter over his eyes. He saw the photo of the black man. He saw the complex barcode and the smart chip, but his brain completely refused to process the words Major General or the clear, distinct rank insignia printed on the card. What is this, some kind of fake contractor badge? Harlan scoffed, tossing the military ID back into the wallet. You think buying a fake badge online gets you a free pass to prowl around rich neighborhoods? Pierce stepped closer, his eyes catching a glimpse of the card before Harlan shoved the wallet into his own uniform pocket. Wait, Derek, let me see that card for a second. That looked like a DOD? It's a fake, Nolan. Stop questioning me, Harlan yelled, grabbing Marcus by the shoulder and spinning him around. Get in the car. Harlan opened the back door of the cruiser and forcefully pushed Marcus down into the hard plastic seat, deliberately pressing down on the older man's neck to ensure his head bumped against the doorframe. Marcus absorbed the impact silently, sliding into the suffocating, stale air of the back seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud, locking from the outside. Inside the cruiser, it was rapidly heating up as the morning sun hit the windows. Marcus sat completely still. His earbud had been knocked loose during the struggle but had fallen into the hood of his sweatshirt, completely unnoticed by Harlan. Faintly vibrating against his collarbone, he could hear the frantic voice of Colonel Ashford. General Langford, sir, are you there? I have the Provost Marshal on the line. I have base security rolling out. General, do you copy? Marcus couldn't reach the earbud, but he spoke clearly enough for the microphone to pick it up. I am secure. Track my phone's GPS. Inform Lieutenant General Langston. Outside the car, Harlan was leaning against the trunk, writing furiously on his notepad. Pierce was pacing nervously, his gut churning with a terrible intuition. Derek, I'm telling you, we need to run that ID through the terminal, Pierce pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. If that guy is who I think he is, he's a nobody, Pierce. He's a thug who wandered into the wrong zip code, Harlan growled, pointing a pen at the rookie's chest. I'm tired of these people coming out to the suburbs thinking they can take whatever they want. I'm charging him with prowling, resisting arrest, and providing false identification. He didn't resist, Pierce argued back, finally finding a shred of spine. And he's standing in front of the house. What if he actually lives there? Then he can prove it to the magistrate, Harlan sneered. He walked around to the driver's side and climbed in, firing up the engine. Pierce reluctantly climbed into the passenger seat, staring through the thick plexiglass partition at the man sitting quietly in the back. Marcus met Pierce's eyes through the rearview mirror. The general's gaze was not angry. It was cold, calculating, and terrifyingly calm. It was the look of an apex predator patiently waiting for the trap to spring. Pierce felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. Officer Harlan, Marcus said through the grated partition, his voice cutting through the hum of the cruiser's air conditioning. I am formally requesting that you contact your watch commander. Furthermore, I advise you to read the military identification card you confiscated from me. You have exactly one opportunity to correct this before it leaves your hands. Harlan let out a harsh bark of laughter, shifting the car into drive. You watch too many movies, old man. You don't give orders back there. You sit down, shut up, and enjoy the ride to county. Very well, Marcus replied softly, leaning back into the hard plastic. You were warned. As Harlan pulled the cruiser away from the curb, he reached for his radio to call in the transport. He had no idea that a short distance away, the massive steel gates of the military installation had just swung open. 3 black armored Chevrolet Suburbans, flanked by 2 heavily armed military police cruisers, were already tearing down the highway, sirens wailing and lights flashing. Lieutenant General Victor Langston, the base commander and Marcus's immediate superior, was sitting in the lead vehicle. Langston was a man who did not tolerate mistakes, and he absolutely did not tolerate local law enforcement putting their hands on his commanding officers. I want that police cruiser intercepted before it reaches the precinct, Langston barked into his encrypted radio, his face flushed with fury. And I want the badge numbers of the officers involved. They just declared war on the wrong man. The interior of the police cruiser was thick with a suffocating, hostile silence. In the back seat, Major General Marcus Langford sat completely still, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, the metal biting into his wrists with every bump in the road. He focused on the rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt, letting his military training govern his physiological responses. His heart rate remained steady and calm. He did not speak. He did not complain. He simply waited. In the front passenger seat, Officer Nolan Pierce was rapidly losing his battle with anxiety. The rookie's stomach churned violently. He could not shake the memory of the cold, authoritative gaze the man in the back had directed at him. That was not the look of a frightened burglar or a seasoned street criminal. That was a look of absolute, unwavering command. Pierce discreetly pulled his smartphone from his tactical vest, shielding the screen from Harlan's peripheral vision. With a trembling thumb, he opened his web browser and typed the name he had briefly seen on the confiscated driver's license, Marcus Langford, adding the keywords military and 2-star general. The search results populated instantly, and all the blood drained from Pierce's face. The top result was a Department of Defense press release from just weeks earlier. There was a high-resolution photograph of the man currently sitting in the back of their cruiser. In the photo, however, Marcus was not wearing a faded hoodie. He was dressed in a pristine Army service uniform, his chest covered in a colorful wall of ribbons, including the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, and the Bronze Star. On his shoulders sat the heavy silver insignias of a 2-star Major General. The headline read, Major General Marcus Langford takes command of Joint Strategic Operations Center at Regional Base. Pierce felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. He swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly devoid of saliva. He looked over at his training officer. Harlan was casually chewing a piece of gum, one hand resting lazily on the steering wheel, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just committed an act of monumental professional suicide. "Derek," Pierce whispered, his voice cracking. "Derek, pull the car over." "What?" Harlan scoffed, not taking his eyes off the road. "We're minutes from the precinct, kid. Hold your bladder." "No, Derek, listen to me right now," Pierce pleaded, turning his body fully toward the senior officer. He shoved the smartphone directly into Harlan's line of sight. "Look at this picture. Look at it. The guy in the back, he's not a prowler. He's a 2-star general. He's the new commander of the base up the highway." Harlan aggressively swatted the phone away, his face turning red with sudden anger. "Are you out of your mind? You believe everything you see on the internet? That's a coincidence, or he stole the guy's identity. I'm telling you, the ID in his wallet was fake. It felt cheap. Now put your damn phone away before I write you up for insubordination." "He told you he lived at the expensive house, Derek. The press release says he just transferred here. The ID wasn't fake. You just didn't read it." Pierce was almost shouting now, true panic setting in. "We need to uncuff him and apologize right now. We are kidnapping a federal officer." "Shut your mouth, Pierce," Harlan roared, his grip tightening on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "I am the senior officer. I make the calls. This thug is going into a holding cell, and if you say one more word, I'll make sure you're riding a desk for the rest of your miserable short career." Before Pierce could respond, the radio mounted on the dashboard crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice sounded tense, carrying an edge of urgency that neither officer had ever heard before. "Unit 4 Bravo dispatch, come in 4 Bravo." Harlan snatched the radio mic. "This is 4 Bravo, go ahead. Pull over immediately and secure your location. Advise your coordinates. We are receiving emergency communications from the Department of Defense. They are tracking your vehicle." Harlan froze, the microphone hovering near his lips. "Repeat. Dispatch. DOD is tracking us? For what?" "They state you have unlawfully detained a high-ranking military official. The base commander is en route to your location with a heavily armed detail. Do not proceed to the precinct. I repeat, do not proceed. Pull over immediately." A heavy, terrifying silence fell over the front seat. Pierce stared at Harlan, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "I told you," Pierce whispered, his voice barely a breath. "I told you." Harlan's arrogant facade finally began to crack, replaced by a desperate, stubborn denial. No, it's a trick. He's got somebody on the outside making fake calls. I'm not pulling over. We're going to the station to sort this out." He pressed his foot harder on the accelerator, but as they crested the hill, the decision was made for them. Approaching from the opposite direction at terrifying speed was a convoy of 3 massive matte black armored Chevrolet Suburbans, flanked by 2 military police cruisers with their blue and red tactical lights blindingly bright. The wail of the heavy military sirens drowned out everything else. "Holy!" Harlan muttered, his eyes widening in shock. The lead Suburban didn't slow down to pass. Instead, it aggressively swerved across the double yellow line, hurtling directly into the path of the police cruiser. Harlan slammed on the brakes, the tires screaming against the pavement as the heavy police interceptor skidded to a violent halt. Instantly, the 2 military police cruisers whipped around the sides, blocking the police vehicle from the rear. The remaining Suburbans angled themselves perfectly to box the local police cruiser in completely. There was nowhere to go. Before the dust had even settled, the doors of the military vehicles flew open. Over a dozen heavily armed military police officers poured out into the street. They were dressed in full tactical gear, Kevlar vests, ballistic helmets, and carried M4 carbines held at the low ready. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, instantly establishing a hardened perimeter around the trapped police cruiser. Harlan sat frozen behind the wheel, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. The flashing lights painted his pale, terrified face in alternating shades of red and blue. "Hands where we can see them. Both hands on the dashboard. Now!" roared a burly military police sergeant, aiming his weapon directly at the windshield of the police cruiser. Pierce instantly slammed both of his hands against the glass, practically hyperventilating. Harlan, shaking uncontrollably, slowly raised his hands to the steering wheel. The predator had suddenly and violently become the prey. The air outside the police cruiser vibrated with the low, menacing hum of the armored Suburban's massive engines. The military police had completely locked down the highway, stopping civilian traffic in both directions. Officer Harlan sat paralyzed behind the wheel, his previous arrogance entirely evaporated and replaced by a cold, hollow dread. From the rear door of the lead Suburban stepped Lieutenant General Victor Langston. He was a towering figure with a chiseled jaw, piercing eyes, and an aura of absolute authority that commanded immediate compliance. He wore his utility camouflage uniform, the 3 black stars pinned to his chest, gleaming under the morning sun. He did not run. He marched toward the police cruiser with slow, deliberate, heavy steps, like an executioner approaching the block. Flanked by 2 armed MPs, Langston stopped inches from Harlan's driver's side window. He did not tap on the glass. He simply stared down at the trembling local cop until Harlan fumbled with the controls and rolled the window down. "I am Lieutenant General Victor Langston, commander of the Joint Strategic Operations Center." Langston's voice was dangerously quiet, a stark contrast to the shouting of his MPs. "Step out of the vehicle slowly. Keep your hands away from your duty weapon." Harlan's voice trembled as he tried to summon a shred of his former bravado. "General, sir, I am operating under local municipal jurisdiction. You have no legal authority." "Step out of the vehicle before my men forcibly extract you through the windshield, officer," Langston interrupted, his tone laced with venom. Pierce, sitting in the passenger seat, didn't wait for permission. He threw his door open, shoved his hands high into the air, and practically fell out onto the pavement. "Don't shoot! Please, I told him. I tried to tell him," Pierce cried out, backing away from the vehicle with his hands raised. Harlan, realizing he was entirely outmatched and utterly alone, slowly opened his door and stepped out onto the highway. The moment his boots touched the asphalt, 2 military police officers stepped forward, forcefully spinning him around and pressing him against the side of his own cruiser. They expertly disarmed him, stripping his service weapon from its holster and tossing it onto the hood of the car. "Hey, you can't do this. I am a sworn officer of the law," Harlan yelled, though his voice cracked pathetically. Langston ignored him completely. He stepped toward the rear passenger door of the cruiser and looked through the glass. When he saw Major General Marcus Langford, a man who had saved Langston's life during a brutal ambush years earlier, sitting in the back seat in a faded hoodie, handcuffed like a common criminal, a muscle in Langston's jaw twitched furiously. "Open this door," Langston commanded without looking back. Pierce practically sprinted over, his hands shaking so badly he dropped his keys twice before finally managing to unlock the rear door. Marcus stepped out of the suffocating heat of the cruiser. He stood up straight, rolling his broad shoulders. He looked perfectly composed, though there were deep red indentations circling his wrists. "Sir," Langston said, his voice softening slightly as he executed a crisp salute. "At ease, Victor," Marcus replied calmly, returning the salute despite his bound hands. "Sergeant, get those cuffs off the general immediately," Langston barked. An MP rushed forward with a universal key, and the heavy steel cuffs fell to the pavement with a sharp clatter. Marcus brought his hands forward, slowly rubbing the circulation back into his wrists. Langston turned his attention back to Harlan, who was being held firmly against the car by the MPs. The 3-star general closed the distance until he was inches from Harlan's face. "Who gave you the authority to assault and kidnap a United States military commanding officer?" Langston demanded, his voice echoing across the silent highway. "He was prowling," Harlan stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. "He was wearing a hoodie in a wealthy neighborhood. There were burglaries. I asked for ID and he refused. When I searched him, he had a fake DOD card." Marcus stepped forward, his expression stone cold. "I did not refuse. I told you I lived at the residence you stopped me in front of. You confiscated my wallet, saw my driver's license, and when you saw my military ID, you declared it a fake without running it through your terminal. You didn't see an officer, Peterson. You saw a black man in a hoodie, and your prejudice made the decision for you." Langston's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. He reached into Harlan's uniform pocket and extracted Marcus's leather wallet. He flipped it open, pulling out the common access card. He held it up directly in front of Harlan's eyes. "Look at this card, officer," Langston whispered fiercely. "Look at the hologram. Look at the smart chip. Look at the 2 stars printed right next to the name of a man who has bled for this country more times than you have drawn breath. You didn't verify it because your ego and your bias blinded you to reality." At that moment, the wail of approaching sirens signaled the arrival of local backup. A single municipal police SUV skidded to a halt near the military perimeter. Out stepped Sergeant Malcolm Voss, the shift supervisor. Voss took one look at the heavily armed military convoy, the disarmed Harlan, and the two generals standing by the cruiser, and his face drained of color. "What in the hell is going on here?" Voss asked, jogging forward and keeping his hand strictly away from his belt. "Sergeant Voss, I presume," Langston said, turning his piercing gaze to the supervisor. "Your officer here has just unlawfully detained Major General Marcus Langford under false pretenses, utilizing excessive force and ignoring valid federal identification." Voss looked at Harlan, horror dawning in his eyes. He had warned Harlan about his aggressive profiling tactics for years. Now the idiot had gone and arrested the Pentagon's newest regional commander. "General, I am profoundly sorry," Voss stammered, removing his hat. "I assure you this is not how this department operates." "Save your apologies, Sergeant," Marcus spoke up, his voice resonating with commanding clarity. "Officer Harlan has demonstrated a profound danger to the public he has sworn to protect. He operates on racial bias rather than legal procedure. He escalated a peaceful interaction into a physical assault because his authority was not blindly worshipped." Marcus stepped closer to the terrified Harlan. The general didn't yell. He didn't have to. The quiet intensity of his words was heavier than any shout. "You thought you were putting me in my place this morning, officer," Marcus said softly. "You thought the badge on your chest gave you the right to strip a man of his dignity simply because you didn't like the way he looked, but you chose the wrong man. And today, your career ends." The crisp morning air felt entirely different now, heavy with the suffocating weight of consequence. On the asphalt of the highway, the flashing lights of the military convoy and local police cruisers painted a chaotic canvas. Officer Derek Harlan stood frozen against the side of his vehicle, stripped of his service weapon and his pride. Sergeant Malcolm Voss did not hesitate. He had spent years watching Harlan walk the razor-thin line of departmental policy, knowing the man harbored deep-seated prejudices, but lacking the definitive proof needed to bypass the police union's formidable shielding. Now the proof was standing right in front of him, flanked by three-star military brass and a convoy of heavily armed federal troops. "Officer Harlan," Voss said, his voice stripped of any collegial warmth, "turn around and place your hands behind your back." Harlan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of betrayal and terror. "Sarge, you can't be serious. You're going to arrest me? I made a mistake, okay? It was a misunderstanding. I thought he was a suspect from the burglaries." "You didn't make a mistake, Derek. You made a choice," Voss replied coldly, pulling his own pair of standard-issue steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "You ignored protocol, you ignored valid federal identification, and you assaulted a citizen without probable cause. Turn around, now." Trembling violently, Harlan slowly turned around, placing his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic clicks of the handcuffs locking into place echoed loudly against the silent highway. The profound irony of the moment was not lost on anyone present. The exact same restraints Harlan had aggressively forced onto Major General Marcus Langford mere moments ago were now biting into his own wrists. "Derek Harlan, you are under arrest for false imprisonment, official misconduct, and assault under color of law." Voss recited the Miranda rights with a practiced mechanical rhythm, ensuring every word was captured by the dash cams of the surrounding vehicles. In the background, Lieutenant General Victor Langston turned to Marcus. "Sir, my medical staff is on standby at the base. I strongly suggest we have you examined to document the abrasions on your wrists." "That won't be necessary, Victor," Marcus said calmly, his gaze fixed on Harlan being loaded into the back of Voss's SUV. "But I do want Major Elias Montgomery from the JAG dispatched to the municipal precinct immediately. I want a federal chain of custody established for the dash cam and body cam footage before anyone has a chance to experience a technical malfunction." "Consider it done," Langston nodded sharply, pulling a secure satellite phone from his vest. Meanwhile, Rookie Officer Nolan Pierce was leaning against the hood of a military cruiser, his head buried in his hands. He was physically shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting him hard. Voss walked over to the young officer, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Pierce," Voss said firmly, "look at me." Pierce looked up, his face pale. "Sarge, I tried to stop him. I swear to God, I looked the general up on my phone. I showed Derek the press release. He just wouldn't listen. He slapped the phone out of my hand. I know, kid. I heard you yelling when you got out of the car, Voss said, his tone softening slightly. But right now, I need you to be a police officer. You are a material witness to a federal crime. I need your body cam right now. Unplug it and hand it over. Pierce immediately unclipped the small black camera from his chest rig and handed it to his sergeant. Voss placed it into an evidence bag, sealing it tightly. The drive back to the municipal precinct was a masterclass in psychological agony for Harlan. Sitting in the hard plastic back seat of the supervisor's SUV, the reality of his situation began to crush him. He was a veteran officer. He had a pension. He had a mortgage. In the span of less than an hour, his entire life had unraveled because his ego refused to accept that a black man in a faded hoodie could own an expensive home and command an entire military installation. When the convoy pulled into the precinct's secure underground sallyport, the welcoming committee was already waiting. Chief of Police Raymond Becker, a stern, no-nonsense administrator who had been abruptly pulled from his morning routine, stood with his arms crossed. Next to him stood two special agents from the local FBI field office. Voss opened the rear door of the SUV and hauled Harlan out by his bicep. Harlan looked up at Chief Becker, searching desperately for a lifeline. "Chief, please," Harlan begged, his voice cracking pitifully. "The Union." "The Union cannot save you from the Department of Defense, Derek," Chief Becker interrupted, his voice echoing in the concrete garage. "I just got off the phone with the Pentagon. You didn't just arrest a citizen. You detained the commander of the Joint Strategic Operations Center. The FBI is taking lead on this investigation regarding civil rights violations. You are stripped of your police powers. Effective immediately." Harlan's knees buckled slightly, but Voss held him upright. "Process him," Becker ordered Voss, "and put him in holding cell 4 alone." As Harlan was marched toward the booking desk, the heavy steel doors of the holding cells looming ahead, he realized the inescapable truth. The badge that had shielded him from his own prejudice for years had just been shattered against a wall of undeniable authority. The system he had weaponized was now turning its unforgiving machinery directly onto him. The interrogation room was uncomfortably cold, the stark fluorescent lights humming with a low, irritating buzz. Harlan sat at the metal table, stripped of his uniform shirt, wearing only a standard-issue gray undershirt. His wrists were free, but the phantom pressure of the handcuffs remained. Across the table sat Raymond Becker, the senior representative for the local police union. Becker was sweating, continuously mopping his brow with a crumpled handkerchief. He had built his career protecting cops from disciplinary boards, employing a ruthless strategy of delaying tactics and technicalities. But today, Becker looked like a man standing on the tracks watching a freight train approach. "Okay, Derek, listen to me," Becker whispered, leaning forward. "We stick to the script. You had reasonable suspicion. The neighborhood had experienced burglaries. The suspect matched the general description of an adult male. He refused to identify himself properly. You used standard stabilization techniques. It was a good faith mistake." Before Harlan could nod, the heavy metal door clicked open. In walked Special Agent Marcus Reed of the FBI, closely followed by Major Elias Montgomery, a razor-sharp attorney from the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Major Montgomery placed a thick black briefcase on the table and opened it with 2 crisp snaps. "Good morning, gentlemen," Agent Reed said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. He didn't offer a handshake. "Let's get right to it. Mr. Harlan, you are currently facing federal charges for deprivation of rights under color of law." "My client acted within the scope of his duties based on reasonable suspicion," Becker interjected immediately, puffing out his chest. "General Langford was uncooperative, and the identification provided was deemed suspicious in the heat of the moment. We are prepared to argue qualified immunity." Major Montgomery smiled, a terrifying, predatory smile. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small portable digital audio player. "Mr. Becker," Major Montgomery said smoothly, his voice laced with absolute confidence, "are you aware that General Langford was on an active open-line conference call with his Chief of Staff, Colonel Julian Ashford, at the exact moment your client initiated the stop?" Harlan's stomach dropped into his shoes. The blood drained from Becker's face. "No," Becker whispered. "Yes," Major Montgomery continued, tapping the digital player. General Langford utilizes a highly sensitive military encrypted wireless earbud. When your client aggressively assaulted him, the earbud fell into the hood of the general's sweatshirt. It recorded the entire interaction with crystal-clear audio directly to the Department of Defense secure servers. Major Montgomery pressed the play button. The small speaker crackled to life, filling the interrogation room with Harlan's own voice. "Nobody jogs in a hoodie that beat up around here, kid. This is a gated-style community. He's casing the houses. I don't need a description. I know what doesn't belong." Then came Marcus's calm, authoritative voice explaining his residence, followed by the sickening sound of the physical struggle and Harlan's mocking dismissal of the military ID. "It's a fake, Nolan. Stop questioning me. He's a nobody, Pierce. He's a thug who wandered into the wrong zip code." Major Montgomery stopped the recording. The silence in the room was deafening. "As you can hear," Agent Reed said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table, "there was no reasonable suspicion. There was no good faith mistake. Your client explicitly stated he did not need a suspect description because he, quote, knew what didn't belong. That establishes clear, undeniable racial bias and premeditation for a civil rights violation." Becker slowly closed his notepad. He looked at Harlan, then looked at the federal agents. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. "I need to confer with union leadership," Becker said quietly, pushing his chair back. "Raymond, you can't leave me here." Harlan panicked, grabbing the union rep's sleeve. Becker gently pried Harlan's fingers off his arm. "Derek, they have you on federal audio admitting to profiling a two-star general. I can't fight the Department of Defense and the DOJ at the same time. You're on your own." As the door clicked shut behind the union rep, the final nail was driven into Harlan's coffin. Major Montgomery pulled a secondary stack of files from his briefcase. They were thick manila folders, each one stamped with the police department's internal affairs seal. This incident gave the Department of Justice the probable cause necessary to subpoena your entire disciplinary jacket, Mr. Harlan, Agent Reed explained, tapping the stack of files. "We found multiple previous complaints of racial profiling, unlawful detention, and excessive force, all buried by your union, all dismissed by internal reviews. Because you picked the wrong target today, the DOJ is reopening every single one of these cases. You are not just going to prison for what you did to General Langford. You are going to answer for every person you bullied when you thought nobody was watching." Harlan buried his face in his hands, a pathetic, sobbing gasp escaping his lips. The armor of his badge was gone. The protection of his union was gone. He was nothing but a broken man facing the crushing weight of his own karma. Across town, General Marcus Langford stood in his home office, looking out over the pristine, quiet neighborhood. His wrists still ached slightly, a physical reminder of the morning's ordeal. He had commanded troops in the most dangerous corners of the globe, fighting to protect the liberties of his country. Today, he had fought that same battle on his own front lawn. He had not used a weapon, he had used patience, intellect, and the uncompromising power of truth. The battle was won, and the streets were a little bit safer. The federal courthouse was an imposing structure of polished granite and reinforced glass, a fitting arena for the final chapter of Derek Harlan's downfall. In the months that followed the incident, the atmosphere inside courtroom 4B was suffocatingly tense. Harlan sat at the defense table, looking entirely diminished. Stripped of his badge, his uniform, and the aggressive bravado that had defined his adult life, he appeared remarkably small. He wore an ill-fitting gray suit that hung loosely on his frame, his face pale and deeply lined from months of sleepless nights in a pre-trial detention facility. His union had abandoned him, leaving him entirely in the hands of a court-appointed federal public defender who looked equally exhausted by the sheer weight of the evidence they were up against. Across the aisle, the prosecution table was anchored by Assistant United States Attorney Camille Thornton, a formidable litigator who specialized in civil rights abuses under color of law. But the true center of gravity in the room was the man sitting in the front row of the gallery. Major General Marcus Langford sat in perfect, motionless posture. Today, there was no faded black hoodie. He wore his pristine Army Service uniform. The twin silver stars on his epaulets gleamed under the recessed lighting, and the rows of colorful ribbons on his chest told a silent, undeniable story of ultimate sacrifice and unwavering loyalty to his nation. Lieutenant General Victor Langston sat to his immediate right. serving as a silent, imposing guardian of military solidarity. The trial had been swift and brutal for the defense. Rookie officer Nolan Pierce had taken the stand early. Pierce had voluntarily resigned from the local police force shortly after the incident, unwilling to serve in a department whose culture had bred men like his former training officer. Under oath, Pierce recounted the morning with devastating clarity. He testified about Harlan's immediate, baseless assumption regarding the general's presence in the wealthy neighborhood. He detailed his own desperate attempts to show Harlan the Department of Defense press release, and how Harlan had violently swatted the phone away, choosing blind prejudice over documented fact. But the fatal blow had come when Prosecutor Thornton played the audio recording captured by the general's military-grade earbud. When the audio filled the silent courtroom, Harlan had stared down at his trembling hands, unable to meet the eyes of the 12 jurors. Hearing his own voice, arrogant, mocking, and dripping with venomous bias, echo off the mahogany walls stripped away any remaining illusion of a simple misunderstanding. The jurors' faces hardened. Several shook their heads in overt disgust. They heard a man who believed his badge was an absolute license to subjugate anyone he deemed beneath him. Now the jury was returning. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice echoing sharply. Judge Preston Aldridge, a stern federal jurist with decades of experience on the bench, took his seat and adjusted his spectacles. He looked down at the jury forewoman, a middle-aged professional who held a folded slip of paper. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Aldridge asked, his voice steady. "We have, Your Honor," the forewoman replied, her tone resolute. Harlan's public defender placed a steadying hand on his client's shoulder. Harlan squeezed his eyes shut, his breathing shallow and erratic. "On the federal charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant Derek Harlan guilty," the forewoman read. "On the charge of false imprisonment, guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault by a peace officer, guilty." A heavy collective exhale swept through the gallery. Harlan slumped forward, burying his face in his hands as a soft, pathetic sob escaped his throat. There was no outrage, no shouting, only the absolute crushing finality of a system correcting a profound error. Judge Aldridge did not wait for a separate sentencing hearing. The federal guidelines were clear, and the judge's patience with corrupt authority figures was non-existent. "Mr. Harlan, stand up," Judge Aldridge commanded. Harlan struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the wooden table for support. "Law enforcement officers are entrusted with an extraordinary amount of power," Judge Aldridge began, his voice echoing with righteous authority. "They are given the authority to suspend a citizen's liberty in the pursuit of justice. When that power is weaponized by prejudice, it does not just harm the victim, it fractures the very foundation of public trust." You looked at a decorated military commander, a man who has devoted his life to defending the freedoms you so casually abused, and you saw only a target for your own bigotry. Your actions were not a mistake. They were a manifestation of malice. The judge paused, letting the heavy words settle over the disgraced cop. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be remanded to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a lengthy term of 15 years without the possibility of early parole. You are further barred for life from holding any position of public trust or authority." The sound of the judge's gavel striking the sounding block cracked through the room like a gunshot. Federal marshals immediately flanked Harlan. They pulled his arms behind his back, the same aggressive, humiliating motion he had used on Marcus months earlier, and locked heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. As he was marched down the center aisle toward the holding cells, Harlan locked eyes with General Langford for a fleeting second. Marcus did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply watched the disgraced man walk away with the calm, analytical gaze of a commander watching a neutralized threat removed from the battlefield. Justice had not just been served, it had been absolute. Outside the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds. General Marcus Langford adjusted his service cap and walked down the wide granite steps alongside General Langston. He had not let the darkness of one prejudiced man infect his spirit. Instead, Marcus used the incident as a catalyst, launching a joint task force between the military base and the local community to sponsor legal education and civil rights training for regional law enforcement. He turned an act of hatred into a foundation for lasting change, proving once and for all that true authority requires no shouting, no violence, and no intimidation. True authority is forged in honor, tested in adversity, and defined by the quiet, unyielding power of integrity. Thank you for tuning in to this powerful story of justice, accountability, and the absolute reality of karma hitting back. True leadership and honor will always expose prejudice and corruption in the end. If you felt the satisfaction of seeing this power-tripping officer finally face the consequences of his actions, make sure to hit that like button. Share this story with your friends and family to spread the message that nobody is above the law. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell for more incredible real-life drama. Would you have stayed as calm as the general? Let us know in the comments below.